Well, everyone, you're in trouble now because I'm going to start this one with a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson in a game? Anyway, the quote goes, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail." So the question is, do the legacy paths in Civ 7 let you leave your own trail? Legacy paths in Civ 7, if you'll pardon the expression, broke new ground, at least for the series itself. Up until that point, Civ games had been more freeform, even though ultimately a player aimed for a predetermined victory condition. What some complained about with the introduction of legacy paths was the loss of the sandbox feel of the game and the sense that the game was on rails. But is this on rails aspect of the game any less true of other games? You can only program so many outcomes. Games are all about playing within rules and arriving at one of a set of conclusions. If you want a certain type of win, there are certain things you have to build, buy, defeat to get to that victory. But I do get the distinction between earlier Civ games and this one. That's clear. The legacy paths have a series of requirements and it can all seem like hoop jumping. Or it can be a useful way to structure your game and keep you on your toes. I think it depends on, your personality and how you feel about the game. In previous Civ games, I have tended to get the mid-game doldrums, where I drift from task to task without sticking to a clear plan. And that's the pleasure of the sandbox. But then I would be attacked on multiple fronts and realize the sandbox was trying to swallow me whole. It's not really a sandbox game. The legacy paths encourage wakefulness, if you like at least for me. The notifications at each stage along the path are teeny tiny incentives or reminders, for me in particular. I don't know about you guys. Meanwhile, the devs have made some tweaks to the paths here and there, and even made it possible to turn them off, or to turn one of them off, or two of them off, to approximate a more sandbox-oriented approach to the game. The other interesting element here is that you can experiment within each game with multiple legacy paths. Quite often I might be aiming for one path, but have an easier time with another path due to, say, the availability of resources, the behavior of neighbors, and other factors. Maybe I'm going for the economic legacy path in Antiquity, but neighbors keep pulling me into wars, making it harder to get trading partners, for one thing, but easier to get settlements when they eventually surrender them to me. And you can shine with culture in one age, then find yourself acing science in the next, all while building towards your overarching military victory, maybe? So, yeah, on rails, sure, but more like a combination of a roller coaster and a Rubik's Cube. Still, for the beginning or advanced player, it helps to get a sense of which legacy paths are more enjoyable or difficult or finicky, and also which overall victory conditions are the ones to go for. And if you read around in Reddit, Discord, Facebook, wherever, you'll get a variety of opinions on this subject. And that's what I'm going to offer here, an opinion. Well, several opinions. They're based on what I've read or heard and on some analysis and some personal experience. I think enjoyability is too personal and too loose a criterion to use, though. So when you hear me say that something is fun, please ignore that. I can't help it. The real things we have to look for are clarity in the legacy path and the ease of the legacy path. We might not all agree on what is clear and what is not, but we agree that the clarity involved in a task helps us do it more effectively. So we'll assess that. As for ease or difficulty of a legacy path, I'm going to give more points to the easier paths. Some players might want the difficulty. Many players will want to play a difficult path at one point and then an easier path at another. But I'm going to rank them in terms of easiness rising to the top. One thing I've noticed, though, as I've heard other people's opinions on this, is that some playstyles adapt more easily to some legacy paths than to others. For instance, I will typically find military paths a little more difficult, but I'll try and keep that in mind when I give my rankings here. So, let's dive in. Oh, and let me just add at the beginning here, I'm not going to consider synergy with particular leaders, only with civs from the age I'm looking at. We'll look at the Antiquity paths first. There's some general agreement that Antiquity is the most satisfying of the three ages, and maybe that has something to do with the legacy paths. So let's consider that. The cultural path, the wonders of the ancient world, is in many ways for me the most satisfying of the bunch, maybe of all the paths in the game. Getting wonders has always been a rush in any Civ game, and the wonder videos in this game are solid. And the clarity is there. Get 7 wonders, that's it. Well, you can't get them by conquering. That's the only qualifying thing. They're unlocked by some civs or through the civics tree in Antiquity. The difficulty is in the competition to get them. When I started playing this game at lower levels of difficulty, this path was pretty easy. But as I started ratcheting up the difficulty, I've noticed that I almost never finish the Wonder Path unless I focus on it alone, which is maybe what I should be doing. Another factor is that there are no super strong culture civs in Antiquity. That's why, for clarity, this is a great path. But for difficulty, I think it's one of the hardest in Antiquity because of the AI's eagerness and the lack of culture civ support. So I'm giving it a B tier spot, and that's a really hard call for me to make because I'm close to the whole culture idea in the first place. The military path, or Pax Imperatoria, would seem like my least favorite at first glance. Get 12 points for settlements, 1 per founded settlement, and 2 per conquered settlement. That seems like work to me. But as I alluded to in my intro, sometimes I'll get a good run on this path without even trying too hard, just by having people war me into legacy points when they surrender a settlement. So that's what? Found 6 settlements and conquer 3? That gets you 12 points. That's doable even for someone like me. The tricky part is making sure when you go over your settlement limit that you have the happiness to cover it, or to just pray you don't get the unhappiness event to close out the age. And if you go into this age with this intention to conquer, the Assyrians are what the ancients call closers. Overall, I'd put this path at A tier. With science and the Great Library path, it's a bit of a mixed bag. You collect 10 codices and display them in slots in your palace, libraries, academies, or in the wonder Nalanda. You can get them from the tech and civic trees, city-states, narrative events, and from Nalanda. Getting the codices is a bit of a scavenger hunt, and then displaying them can be a scramble to get enough of the right buildings. If you get lucky, you can finish this before you have to unlock and finish mathematics. If not, mathematics can save you, but only if you don't run out of turns. What you have to get is clear, although you get it through a mishmash of sources. And then the problems with display and the length of time it can take to get all the codices you need. I'm putting this on the B tier. I have to decide whether it's going to go in front of or in back of the cultural path. My feelings about the economic path are much clearer now than when the game first came out. Back then, I found getting 20 resources confusing because of the empire resources that were not counted towards your total. Once you're past that, it's a matter of developing your settlements towards the available resources and trading for the rest. Trade isn't always simple either, but the overall plan is cut and dry. On the fun side, the resources are more photogenic than the codices, and shuffling them from settlement to maximize their bonuses is a cool mini-game. So for being the most engaging path, for me at least, I'm putting this at S tier. On to the age of exploration. With Toshikama, the cultural path for exploration, things get complicated fast. The clarity first. Collect and display 12 relics. Simple. You can get them from converting settlements to your civ's religion, or through narrative events, or through the House of Wisdom Wonder, and through city-states. So, you build a few temples, produce some missionaries, or your civ's equivalent unit, pick from a set of beliefs that will determine where and how you get your conversion points, and then send them out to do insert pantheons work. This one is weird for me because it used to be the toughest cultural path, but now that's the wonders, I think. I simply go for ecclesiasticism, the settlements with 10 or more urban population belief. If you stay on your own continent and spam out missionaries quickly, you can fan out and hit on all the big centers before they get too much religion of their own. But if you get a less favorable conversion belief, or one that doesn't really fit with your strategy, it's all uphill. This path runs hot and cold, and you have to race to get the best beliefs. Average it all out, and this path also goes to the B tier, with A tier aspirations, I think. There's no question that the economic path, Treasure Fleet, was a pain when the game first came out. There were fishing key alignment issues, questions about when fleets developed, and some frequent bad luck finding enough treasure resources or clusters of them to get the 30 Treasure Fleet points. But the treasure convoys, in a few updates back, have helped make access to treasure resources easier all around. Although it dropped the social status of fishing keys. Look, you still have to contend with deep ocean damage just as nature intended, and wartime attacks to your convoys. And it takes time to get things up and running. There are good naval civs. If you're one of them, great. But there are still others you have to avoid going to war with. In terms of clarity, what you have to do is clear-ish once you know your treasure resources. As for difficulty, it's not always easy, depending on conflicts and just plain luck in finding resources. If you're focused, you can get this done, though. This one goes to B tier. With the military path, non sufficit oribus, we have a new wrinkle. 12 points is what you need. 1 per settlement you own, then 2 for each settlement you capture or convert, and 4 points if the conquered settlement follows your religion. I rarely ever manage this path, just for the record. I think the Mongols, honestly, have the right idea by never leaving their home continent, because otherwise it gets more complicated in terms of logistics. In fact, the Bulgarians can also do well without much exploration. The Spanish are definitely stronger overseas, but they're otherwise not very solid as a civ. In a lot of ways, if you're thinking of overseas conquering, I think the Normans are the best choice if you want to take some coastal settlements, for that particular type of attack. Meanwhile, you have 2 victory paths working in concert here, so the synergy is very handy. Still, it's not enough to completely overcome some of the difficulties that I see with this path. I got to put this path on the B tier. Enlightenment, the science path, was easily the most confusing of all the paths for me at the very beginning. But the more I play, the more appealing Enlightenment is. You need to get 5 quarters up over 40 yield points by using specialists to finish this path. The bonuses you get for specialists add up nicely, and once you can figure out which quarters are your best prospects, you're all set. It does take a little more planning than some of the paths, and a little more understanding of the the complexities of adjacencies. The way I would put it is there's a clarity in the final goal, but not necessarily in how to get there. At the same time, it's a more interesting puzzle than many of the ones the game poses. If you're properly set up by a strong Antiquity age, you should be able to finish this one, but only if you know very well what you are doing. I don't think it's the easiest path, but it's one of the most interesting by far. So this gets it a spot on the A tier. Now for the modern era. Railroad Tycoon, the economic legacy path, is not what I would call easy as such, but it's relatively clear. You have to get 500 factory resource points to finish the path, and that sets you up with the World Bank trek to win the game. Getting the resource points takes a lot of time. You have to build railway stations, then build factories, then try and accumulate more factory resources than you started with, through settlement growth and through trade. But with each settlement you have producing factory resources, the numbers start slow but accelerate each time you get a new settlement coming online for you. The problem is that rail stations and factories take a lot of production to build. But by this time, you should have enough gold to build a couple of railway stations anyway, and then later on a couple of factories. Just buy them. And that gets you started early. Then the World Bank just means sending your banker around to all the other capitals, and it's not the quickest or the slowest victory condition, but it's pretty easy. And a tiny bit fun watching him scurry around, I gotta say. For these reasons, I think Railroad Tycoon is an A-tier victory path. With Ideology, the military path, you only get 1 point per captured settlement before you get Ideology. But once you get it, each settlement is worth 2 points. And if they have an opposing ideology, it's 3 points. You need a total of 20 points. Once you figure out whether a neighbor has ideology or not, you're good to go. But sometimes your neighbor takes a long time to develop ideology. And while unhappiness due to going over the settlement limit is not as big a factor in this age, the simple wasting of resources and time capturing 1 point settlements is a pain. There are some good military civs in modern, like Prussia, France, and Imagii, Japan, but I have to admit, I lose patience with this path, even though its attached victory condition, Project Ivy, is one of the wins that can be bought by the Mughals. I think. Maybe not. I'd have to check that. I can't get behind this one. So we have our first C-tier legacy path. A lot has been said recently about the science path, the space race. The recent game update 1.2.5 has made that victory a little bit easier, but not too easy. It's all about the tech tree and unlocking missions to be completed. You need the rocketry tech and a launch pad before you can complete Launch Satellite Project and then move on to the first staff to spaceflight. Which brings us to the present day, right? Yeah, nothing's happened since then. The problem has been how long it takes to get deep enough into the tech tree to unlock rocketry. Again, if you're focused, you can do this, but it's not a particularly new approach to the science victory. It goes all the way back to a similar winning condition in Civ 1. It's still a long haul to get this done, and it's not exactly riveting. Even though the science victory has always been one of my go-tos, I still have to give this a C-tier rating. I like the premise behind the culture legacy path here. Just Indiana Jones it, right? All you have to do is get 15 artifacts. This whole mechanic wasn't in great working condition on the game's release, but it's very much improved now. It's not always straightforward and is literally a scavenger hunt. And they've recently nerfed the speed of the Explorer from 3 to 2, which almost leaves me speechless. I guess they felt everybody was finishing it too quickly. Wow. But once you buy a museum and you pay to get 3 or 4 explorers up and running, this path is very doable, even with a sluggish explorer. And if you happen to be using the Mughals, they can buy the World's Fair Wonder to get you the overall culture victory. I would have to put this path up as a C tier when the game launched, but now I think it's more of an A tier. In the end, I think the overall winner in terms of victory paths is the economic one. It's the new kit, but its constituent parts, they make for good mini games. Something the other victory paths lack as far as I'm concerned. I know that seems simplistic, but when I look at Civ 6, my favorite way to go is with culture, because you got to slot specific works of art, move them around to create sets, and then move them some more near other enemy cities to try and flip them to your side through culture. Yeah, that's how it's done. That, by the way, is also an S tier for me. So I think at least I'm consistent from game to game. The question we began with, does Civ 7 let you find your own path? Well, that's hard to answer with a tier list, obviously. But look at the sheer variety of approaches you have to take to win. I like the interesting legacy paths. Someone else might like the riskier paths, and others still might like the safer paths. I think that there's a fair bit of variety here for different types of players. As for striking a new path, that's all about the company you keep. Each new Civ or leader adds a different way of looking at a path. The path is only as memorable as the people you walk it with. Pretty sure somebody else said that somewhere. Well, that's it for this one. If you liked what you've seen or heard, drop a like or a subscribe. And if you have completely different thoughts on the legacy paths, make them known in the comment section. Until next time, I'm Civilized Raccoon.